the chat box. But otherwise, I'm going to do a quick introduction, share a few thoughts, and then I ask you to hold off on putting questions in the chat box until I share a few things with you, because it will influence how we want those chat boxes to be used. But again, thanks for joining us today. I want to let people know that this is being recorded and will be available on our website. You are welcome to keep your camera on if you'd like, but remember that people can see you when your camera is on, so it might work better if you turn your camera off at your end. We do ask people to stay muted at your end, and we will be, once we get rolling here, we'll be using the chat box for questions that we have, and then I'll be going through the chat box and answering questions. If I can hold on for a second, I need to go back and unmute myself on one of the 4 screens. Which one is it, Carrie? It's not showing that I'm muted on that one. Let me just hit it again one more time. There. All right, I am back. I apparently was muted on one of those, but I think that we got that straightened out. I'm going to ask again that people on your end, when we get rolling, we'll utilize the chat box to ask questions. I will answer as many questions as we can get to during our time. During the elementary portion of this, we stuck around for about a total of 1 hour and 20 minutes, and I think that will work out okay here. If we go past an hour and we still have questions, we might not be able to get to all of them, but any questions that we don't get to, we would encourage you to reach out to your building principal, or we will get answers to those out to you. We're working right now off the skeleton of the plan that the board approved at the last school board meeting. Some of you were probably at that school board meeting. The reason that we weren't able to and aren't able to bring a finalized plan at this point is because a lot of the details in the plan are going to be dependent on how many families choose the all virtual option and how many families choose the on-site hybrid option. And I know that there's a little bit of a cart before the horse there, because you need as much information as possible before you can make your decision. So in a minute, I'll detail a little bit about how we're going to work through that process. I ask that during this that we use the chat only for questions, that we don't put other things in the chat, and that we stay respectful. We didn't have any problems with that in the elementary group. I don't anticipate any problems with that now, but I want to be upfront with that. We've been working since that last board meeting to fill in some of the details on the plan. We needed to know the basic structure of what the board would approve before moving forward with some of the details. So we've been dotting some of those I's and crossing some of those T's, but some of our decisions that we have coming up are going to depend on having at least a pretty good idea of how many students are going to be part of that virtual only cohort and how many are going to be in our actual classrooms. So the next steps, we are looking for parents by the end of this week to let us know what they're feeling now about that option. And you won't be tied to the choice that you make now. So if you're leaning toward having your son or daughter take part in the hybrid model and be on site every other day with their cohort, if you can share that with us, or if you are leaning toward being all virtual. And the other question that we'll be asking, and was asked in the Red Hawk review, is if you are planning to come on site to school, will you be utilizing transportation? Because that will allow us to start digging into our bus routes and how we can physically distance students on our bus routes. Once we have that initial information, that will allow us to do more specific planning across all of our grade levels. And We will allow, so if you make a choice now, let's say that right now you're leaning toward having them take part in the hybrid model rather than being 100% virtual, and situations change and you would like to change that option, we will give a window in mid-August for people to change what they've decided on. And then we also will, during the first week of school, if families start and realize right away that, whoa, this isn't what we had thought it was going to be, the other option is going to work better for us, we will allow changes at that point. And then otherwise, for our 7th through 12th graders, we would strongly prefer that once we get rolling into the school year, that people stay with the option that they've chosen for the first trimester, particularly moving from virtual to on-site is going to cause some difficulties for us because we're really planning how we're going to space students out and how we're going to provide that virtual and on-site instruction based on the number of families or number of students that are taking part in that. If it is a situation where, say, a student is in the hybrid model and is quarantined, or their family just decides we want them to be in virtual, we don't feel that it's safe enough in the hybrid model, we would work with families to be able to make that happen. But in general, we would definitely prefer that students, once the school year gets going, stay in the model that they're in through the end of that first trimester. We also know that there could be some changes across the state or across the county that would require a change for us. We're in phase 2 in Rock County. There's a possibility that Rock County could move back to phase 1, and if they do, it's likely that we would move to an all virtual model. Or if Rock County moved to phase 3, if we got back to school and we found that there weren't outbreaks and there wasn't spread, and we were able to, after a period of time, move to phase 3, we would look at expanding our on-site model. But a lot of those decisions are going to be dependent on what happens down the road. The process that we're going to use for our time tonight is there are some main topics that I want to cover first that we've gotten quite a few questions on. And rather than having a whole bunch of those same questions show up in the chat box, I'd rather that you hold off on putting your questions in until we've gone through those items. And then anything in those areas that you want more in-depth answers on, or a follow-up question, or if there's a separate topic that I didn't address that you have a question on, go ahead and put that in the chat box, and then we'll address as many of those as we're able to. So Carrie is putting up on the screen, these are some of the main topics that we're going to cover initially. And you can just keep that on the screen, Carrie, if it works. And I will start with the use of face. Actually, I'm going to start with physical distancing rather than the use of face coverings. We are working with Rock County Public Health to make sure that we're meeting as best we can the two main guiding principles that we've used in our planning. And those two main guiding principles have been to limit the risk to the health and safety of our students and staff and community as much as we can, while providing the same high quality education that our students are used to getting. So it's really looking for ways to balance those two things. The lower the risk to health and safety and provide a high quality education. And so we've been working with Rock County Public Health on ways that we can do that. One of the things that they strongly recommend for a number of reasons is maintaining physical distancing as much as possible. They use that 6-foot guideline as the distance that people should be staying away from other people whenever that is possible. So we are making that a part of our plan. That physical distancing is built into our plan. And it's part of the reason why we have cohorts at the middle school and the high school rather than bringing all the students in at the same time. In order to allow all of our students who want to come in grades 4K through 6th grade, we have to make some adjustments to our staffing, and we wouldn't be able to keep that physical distancing at the middle school and the high school if we brought all of our students in. So our plan, as if you've been following, as you know, it's to bring half of our students in, half of the alphabet on A days and the other half on B days, so that we're able to maintain that physical distancing. The other thing that allows us to maintain is it decreases the number of people in someone's cohort. And again, there's two reasons that those two things work well together. It limits the spread. If someone is positive for the virus, it limits both the physical distancing and the smaller cohorts, limits the number of people who that potentially could be spread to, so it keeps people healthier. And it also decreases the number of people that would need to get quarantined if a positive case happens. And one thing that I want to highlight before I go on to some of these other topics is the message from Rock County Public Health, because one common question that we've gotten is, if someone does test positive, who gets quarantined? Do we need to close the entire school? Do we need to shut down as a district if a student or a staff member tests positive? Does every student that was in that classroom or in the same area with that person get quarantined? And Rock County Public Health is going to be publicizing their steps for quarantining and for making those decisions. And they told us that information would be coming out by the end of this week, so we're waiting for that. But we've had conversations with them for the last few months about this and other topics. And what they've told us is, if, let's say, for instance, a staff member tests positive and we have to go back and see who that person has been in contact with. What Rock County Public Health has told us is that they would require a quarantine for anyone that has had a physical contact with that person over the 48 hours before their symptoms developed. So you go back 2 days before they had symptoms and determine who had physical contact with that person. And they define physical contact as any type of touch, a handshake, pat on the back, a high five, a hug. So obviously we are discouraging any type of physical contact with our physical distancing. The other thing that they look for, though, is anyone that has been inside that person's close clinical contact group, which they define as inside of 6 feet, indoors, for 15 or more minutes. So those are the people that would be quarantined. If someone is in a school but hasn't been in that person's circle of influence, and again, that's inside of 6 feet, indoors for 15 or more minutes, then they would not be quarantined. So that's the other reason for our smaller cohorts and our need to physical distance, because it limits the number of people who potentially could or would be quarantined. We really have a strong goal of not only being able to return our students and staff to on-site schools as soon as it's safe to do so, but also once they're here, to be able to keep them here and not have an atmosphere where there are a large number of outbreaks and we end up returning to an all virtual atmosphere. So following the guidelines that we put in place are going to make those things much more likely. The use of face coverings I'll go to next. Face coverings are required for students and all staff members unless they have a medical reason for an accommodation, and then we would work with them on some type of an accommodation for that. We do give people an option what those face coverings look like. So I'm trying not to use the word masks, because masks aren't the only face coverings that people would be allowed to use. They could be the typical cloth mask that people wear over their nose and mouth and hook behind the ears or behind the head. It also could be a face shield that goes down and covers the entire face, including the nose and mouth. Many people, and these are allowed to wear some type of a gaiter like I have on tonight, that can be pulled up when it's not around the neck, or a bandana that could do the same type of thing. So when we talk about required face coverings, excuse me for a second. When we talk about required face coverings, it could be any of those type. Those will be required anytime a student is on the bus or when they are in any shared space in our schools, which include classrooms, office areas, the main office, guidance office, restrooms, going to the lunchroom. Obviously, students can take their face covering off while they're eating their lunch. In the classroom, students will be required to wear their face coverings unless everyone is in their desk or in their seat and everyone in the classroom has more than 6 feet of social distancing. Then we would allow people to take their face covering off, although we would still recommend that those stay on even during that time. So it changes from a requirement to a recommendation just in that specific case. So we have, I guess, one more thing on face coverings. Ideally, staff and students will have their own face covering that they've been using over the last few months and will continue to use. They'll bring those to school. Having multiple ones is not a bad idea so that you can rotate those in. They're much more effective if they're being cleaned regularly, and we would expect that that is the case. There are some students who may have a medical need for an accommodation, and whether the students are in that situation or if they have an IEP, their IEP team may determine that they can wear a face shield rather than a mask, or they have certain times when they need to not wear that. But those types of things, any type of exceptions to that would need to be approved by that IEP team. If you have more specific questions about face coverings, you can add those to the chat, and we'll take a look at those, or you can follow up with your building principals on that. I also want to talk a little bit about screening. We'll have a requirement that all of our staff members screen themselves every day before they come in to work. That will include taking their temperature every day and asking a series of questions of themselves about symptoms and about their contact, any contact that they've had with people who have symptoms or have tested positive. The temperature cutoff that we're going to use is 100.4 degrees. And our staff that are working right now through the summer are utilizing this process, and it seems to be working pretty well for our staff who are working throughout the summer. But if staff members do not pass that screening, they will not be allowed to come in to work on that day. We will have the same expectation for our students. We'll expect that every student that's coming into our schools before they get on the bus or before they show up at the schools, they have at home taken part in the screening. They've taken their temperature, or their parents have taken their temperature. They will answer the questions about symptoms. You will not have to put down what symptoms you have or if you have any symptoms on the screener, but you'll need to ask yourself those questions and whether you've had contact with anyone who has symptoms or who has tested positive. And you will need to verify, though, that you have taken that screening. If you don't pass the screening, you will be expected to stay home and not come into the school building on that day. And again, if there's more specific questions about screening or follow-up questions to that, you can add those to the chat. I talked a little bit already about response to symptoms and a positive test that we'd be working with Rock County Public Health. They're coming out with their guidelines on that, so we don't have our specific procedures for that in place yet. We're waiting for Rock County Public Health to put those out for every school across the county. They've told us that we'll have those by the end of this week. So by the middle part of next week, we should have that information out to families about how specifically we will respond to positive tests or students or staff who are displaying symptoms. In general, if a student shows up at school and they show symptoms, we would utilize our health service to test them and contact parents and have parents come and pick them up, or if the student has driven and we get an okay from parents for them to drive home, we would let them do that. We would have a separate room where the students wait, separated from the rest of the student body if they have symptoms and we're waiting for them to be picked up. I'll talk about cohorts a little bit. The cohorts aren't as specific at the middle and high school level as they are at the elementary level, because our students who are on site will be traveling from one class to the next. But we want to keep the contact that students have with other students as small as possible, for the reasons that I shared before. So I think that I guess the one other thing, and again, I spoke to this a little bit, but some more details on that ability to change from virtual to on-site. Again, in mid-April, there will be that opportunity to change what you chose at this time. And then once the school year starts during that first week, the ability to change from virtual to on-site. And then the opportunity in extreme cases to appeal being able to change if needed. But we would strongly encourage people to stay in the group that they're in until the end of the semester, or excuse me, until the end of the trimester. If there is a situation where a student is in the hybrid system and they become quarantined, or they are home because they are ill, we would allow them to move to a totally virtual option for the time that they are out, clearly. So I think that hit on kind of the main topics that I wanted to get to. So I'm going to go into the chat box and answer questions. People who are watching can go ahead and put questions in the chat box as we go, and I'll just take them in the order that they were asked. If it is something that I just spoke to and it was already in the box, I'll skip over it. But if I skip over it and you want more specific details, definitely add it to the chat box and we'll get back to it. The first one is the choice we make for the entire school year, first semester, or could it change to all school or all virtual? I think I spoke to that, but I want to be clear that we know that the situation is likely to change. We hope that it changes for the better, and we're able to get to a situation where everyone is coming into school every day. Until that happens, we will be working with the plan that we have in place. We'll continue to monitor, though. We are in contact with Rock County Public Health all the time about the current status in Rock County. The choice that individual families make, I just spoke to different options that they'll have about being able to change that. So I think that takes care of that question. Remote learning versus cohort learning. Who teaches which? Is it at the same time? Can kids meet teachers before school starts, especially if they are remote? A couple different pieces to that, and I'll answer some of that. And some of that might look a little bit different at the middle school than it does at the high school. So if there are more specifics that you'd like than I'm able to provide, I would encourage you to reach out to your building administrators for more details on that. But I'll give a little bit of I'll give you a little bit of an overview on that topic. The question about is it at the same time, the term in educational circles that's used is that's called synchronous learning, where the teacher is teaching the class, students that are not present at that time are logged in at that exact same time, and they are taking part at the same time as the people who are on site. It's called synchronous learning because it's happening at the same time. Remote learning that takes part outside of that same time is called asynchronous learning because it's not happening at the same time. And in working with educational professionals on what's best practice, what they recommend is a combination of the two. There are some things about synchronous learning that work well, both for the student and for the teacher. There are also things about synchronous learning that don't work as well, both for the student and for the teacher. And the same thing for asynchronous. So our plan has a combination of the two. There are times when there will be an expectation that the students who are choosing to be remote will be expected to be logging in at the same time as their cohort partners who are on site. So students need to have that time available in their schedule, in their day, because there will be an expectation that they'll be logging in at times at the same time. But there won't be a requirement that those off-site learners, whether they're hybrid or completely remote, there won't be a requirement that they will be logged in with the group learning synchronously all the time. And that's my, in general, answer to that. But definitely feel free to follow up with the building administrators for more specifics on what that will look like in each building. The second part of that question was, can kids meet teachers before school starts, especially if they are remote? Part of the system will be building in how that communication will take place between the remote students and the on-site teachers. In the spring, we had students that would be emailing teachers or messaging teachers at 10:30 or 11 o'clock at night and expecting a quick response to that. And that isn't, as we move forward, that's not fair to our teaching staff. So we want to make sure that we have the ability for students to communicate with their teachers and get questions answered with their remote teachers, but also make sure that it's a system that is manageable for our staff. So we're still working out what the specific details will look like. And the reason that we don't have all of that completely lined up is because it's going to be somewhat dependent on how many remote-only learners we have. So what I can tell you now, though, is that we will have a system where remote learners will have times where they will be able to be in contact with teachers. Teachers will be in contact with those remote learners, but the exact details of that are going to depend on how large those groups of remote learners are. I see a couple comments that people can hear me. I like to hear that. Why every other day and not AA virtual BB? It would ease planning for families and be less confusing which day students have school. Students with special needs need consistency as well, as this would help. Will the number of students in a bathroom? Oh, there's a bunch of questions on this one. Okay. I guess I'll take these questions one at a time. The first question is about, if I'm understanding that correctly, why every other day with the cohorts, and I'm interpreting that to mean maybe why we aren't bringing students in every day. We're not bringing our on-site students in every day because we don't have the ability to physically distance students if everyone is there every day, I guess, is the simple answer to that. The hybrid system, why that's going a day and a B day, is because it allows that mix of synchronous and asynchronous learning for students. It allows staff to prepare a on-site lesson for the students that are on-site, and then also on the days that, and prepare a lesson that those students will be able to work on asynchronously when they are off-site. I'll move to the next one, but I guess there was a second part to that too about special needs students. If there is a student, a special needs student whose IEP team determines that the system that we have in place isn't the best educational system for them, then that IEP team can make accommodations for that student, and one accommodation might be how often that student attends on-site. Will the number of students in a bathroom be monitored? Yes, teachers will be hesitant to have students out of the classroom at any time. There'll be an expectation that physical distancing will be taking place when students are not in the classroom as well as when they are in the classroom. Will there be more than one entrance to the middle school open? That's going to depend on how many students are coming in. It's much easier for us if students are coming in at one time, but We will have to work out how that will work with transportation and with our busing system. We may have one entrance that is being used for our students who are riding transportation and one entrance that's being used for family drop-off, but that is something that we will still work out. What percentage of students do you need to go virtual to make this work? I think that we can make this work no matter what number of families decide to go virtual. We can get the social distancing, physical distancing in our classrooms with the A day and B days for students. Even if there aren't any students that are fully virtual, we've heard from some families that we know do plan to go virtual, but we can make it work no matter how many that is. What happens when there aren't subs available? Will teachers be forced to give up their prep to cover? Teachers will be able to get their prep time. We know that there's a possibility that if there are outbreaks and quarantines, if staff members are out, and we struggle to get substitute teachers, we may need to make some changes to the plan that we have in place. One of the things that it kind of relates to this question, so I'll address it now. A question that we got from our teaching staff is, what if they are quarantined but not sick? And they asked, would we be able to teach our class virtually while we're quarantined but not feeling any symptoms and not sick? And there may be some times where we would want and need to do that, where that would be in the best interest of our students to allow a staff member to do that. And this might be a situation. If there's not a sub available and we have a staff member who's home but is healthy, we could have them teach that class virtually for that day or for that period of time, potentially. The next question, you said for households with students in 7 to 12 who have different last names, all students in that household will be cohorted according to the oldest child's last name. What about their siblings that are K6? So I think I understand the question, and I'll try to describe it so that other people can understand what's being asked there. If there's a family that has multiple last names, we would cohort them at the 7 through 12 grade level according to the last name of the oldest student. So if the last name of the oldest student was McDonald, they would be with the other M, last name M students, excuse me. The question asks about siblings in grades K6. The siblings in grades K6 aren't cohorted by last name, so those students would still be, if those students are choosing to attend school, they would still be coming to school every day. And if they were choosing to be virtual, they would still be virtual every day. What's the current status of after-school sports and activities? Will these still happen as of right now? The WIAA has a meeting coming up on Thursday to look at some different options for after-school sports and activities. And our district, right now, it's up to individual districts on whether these will happen or not. And our district hasn't made a decision on that yet. We're working with surrounding districts and other Badger Conference districts, because if we're going to have our fall sports, we need to have teams that we could compete against in those sports. So it's going to depend on what that group ends up doing. And we're hoping for some more guidance from the WIAA on a statewide level, but so far they haven't provided statewide guidance. We're hoping that their meeting that's coming up on Thursday will lead them to provide some more guidance, but we'll see what comes out of that, and then we'll have to look at how we want to move forward. There are definitely some concerns, and with a knowledge that some activities are a different level of risk than other activities. It's much easier to physically distance in some ways than in others. And we definitely don't want a situation where our students are doing a great job of physical distancing, of following the guidelines, of limiting the spread. And then we have an after-school activity that interacts with students from another school, and things are brought into our school. And we definitely would not want to have to close down a school or our district because of a spread that came from an activity. So in general, it's something we're continuing to monitor. If we do have those activities in place, we want to do those in a way that limits the risk as much as possible. How do you do every other day between two groups when there are 5 days in a week? Will one group go 3 days and the other 2? Yes, so the group that is in school on a Friday would be out of school the following Monday. And if we were still in this mode when we got to holidays, it would be the same thing. If the last day that we're here was the A group that's on site, then the next day that we are here, the B group would be on site. Will parents be notified if a student in the same cohorts in a shared class tests positive, is quarantined, or has any symptoms? That's another great question. That is going to stem from the guidance that we're going to get from Rock County Public Health. There are some legal guidelines that we have to follow about our ability to share information about individuals, whether it's a student or a staff member who has symptoms or is quarantined or who tests positive. So we will get that guideline from Rock County Public Health, and then we will work with our legal counsel to make sure that what we put in place both gets as much information out as possible, because I think it's incredibly important that we get as much information out as we're legally allowed to get out as quickly as we can get it out, because that allows people to separate as much as possible. But also we need to stay within those legal ramifications. What's the district threshold for the number of students and staff with positive tests before closure will occur? There isn't a specific number, but again, that would be working with Rock County Public Health on what the numbers look like, both for students and staff with positive tests and also the community members with positive tests. And there isn't if there's 10, then we're no longer open, but like a certain number like that. But it would be continuing to work with Rock County Public Health on what those numbers look like, and are we able to maintain our schools being open in a way that limits that risk for people. What are the consequences for students who say they screen but actually do not and turn out to be COVID positive? There isn't really any way to know, even if someone screened, whether they're going to turn out to be COVID positive. We know that people can be asymptomatic and not know that they're positive, even when they are. Until tests are more widely available, there isn't any way for us to know whether anyone that we interact with is carrying the virus or not. So we ask that, and don't ask that, we require that parents screen their students every day, that staff members screen themselves every day, that nobody steps into our buildings who hasn't screened themselves before coming into the building that day. And if someone exhibits symptoms during the course of the day, then we would treat them as we would treat a student who came down with the flu during the day. We would send them to the nurse's office. We would screen them for anything that they may have. We would contact parents and have parents come and pick them up as soon as possible. We're required by statute to have a room where someone who does show symptoms on site is kept isolated until we are able to move them off of site. Based on the physical distance guidelines, is there a minimum, maximum number of students you're planning on allowing into a classroom? It's not a specific number because our learning spaces vary quite a bit in how big they are. If you think of a gymnasium or a music room or a larger lab space versus a regular classroom versus a more small group learning area, we'll utilize all those different learning spaces, but we'll utilize all of them in a way that allows us to keep 6 feet or more of social distancing throughout that class period. So there isn't a specific number like 15 or smaller in every classroom, because it's going to be dependent on how large that space is, what's the square footage of that space, and how can we set up the desks so that every student is more than 6 feet away from every other student. How will band and choir be handled? It's going to be a little bit different at each grade level and at each school, and it may be different for band than it is for choir. In general, we're working with, there's some nationwide groups that are putting out guidelines for how music groups can be conducted in a way that limits the risk as much as possible. We have been doing some summer band camp over the last few weeks, and I have to throw out some kudos to our band staff and our staff of our other activities, who have really been doing a great job of maintaining that physical distancing, keeping our cohorts small, utilizing our facial coverings so that our students can have those opportunities. Excuse me again a second. So that our students can continue to have those activities, because that opportunity is important, an important part of our education for students, but do it in a way that limits risk as much as possible. So the specific details about band and choir is going to be a kind of a to be determined case, and kind of in a level by level and school by school case. When you get to Q&A, can you please advise if students can make requests to have their buddies in their cohorts to alleviate some stress and anxiety? Who would they make that request to? When will school supply lists be posted for parents? Thank you. We won't be able to honor requests to have individual students move from one cohort to another. We will do it by the alphabet cutoff that we talked about. When will school supply lists be posted for parents? We'll be working on that across all grade levels and hope to have that out as soon as possible. And if I circle back to that question about someone's buddy, we do understand that it is important for students to have that social time with their friends. And we would strongly encourage parents to give their students opportunities to get together with a friend outside of school and maintain that 6 foot physical distancing. If it's sitting across the way in a yard or at a park, we do know that outdoors is a lot less likely for the virus to spread. So we do want that social interaction to take place, and we know that that's important, but we won't be able to allow students to choose their own cohorts, or we wouldn't be able to maintain the sizes of those cohorts. Will the attendance policy be loosened for students and staff? That's something that we're working on right now, and what that will look like, both for students and staff for attendance. So we don't have specific details on that today, but we understand that we're in a global pandemic. We do understand with staff, we need enough staff here each day to be able to provide education for our students. We have an obligation to do that. And we also understand, though, that if there are outbreaks or times when people are quarantined, that they don't have any control about whether they'll be able to be in school or not. So we'll be working with staff and with students on answers to that question. When is the end of first trimester? Is this applicable for middle school? I don't know the exact date, but if one of the principals can just put that in the chat box and we'll add it in, we'll share it later on. Will students be allowed in the building at all without a face covering, forgot at home, or don't want to wear one? No, the face covering is not optional. Students won't be able to, if they ride bus, won't be able to get on the bus without a face covering. If they get dropped off at school, or if they drive or walk to school, they won't be able to come into the building without a face covering. If they forgot one at home, we will have some one-time use disposable face coverings that they can use for that day. If it becomes a pattern where the same student is regularly not wearing theirs, we'll work with families. They will be not following a school rule. So we would, if it becomes a case of, no, I'm not going to wear a face covering, that's one of the reasons that we have the virtual option for students who aren't comfortable coming in to the school with the guidelines that we have in place. So I guess in general, it'll be required that students and staff will have and wear their face covering. Students that decide that they don't want to do that will be given a reminder, but not more than a reminder before. We'll work out a plan with them on how to either correct that behavior to maintain the safety of other students and staff, or have that student be part of the virtual option. Do the cohorts have to be decided by last name? Can there be requests based on other dynamics? Families that are attempting to work together and supervising kids on virtual days, social needs, etc. In order to maintain the sizes of those cohorts, we needed to split them up in a certain way. So we will have to stay with that. We did share earlier that if there's a student on an IEP and they have a need to be there on something outside of that guideline, if their IEP team approves that, we would be able to do that. Are you still planning to not live stream classes when students have virtual days, or are virtual days to still be homework only days? I'll start with the second part of that question. I don't know that there was ever a case where virtual days were planned to be homework only days. I know that we addressed that question at our last board meeting. I think that more specifics on that, if there are specific questions on that, that can be addressed by the building principals. But there's not an intent that virtual days are homework only days. There is online work is learning for students, and it definitely is not what would typically or traditionally be defined as homework. The first part of that question, are we still planning to not live stream classes when students have virtual days? I think that's getting at the difference between synchronous and asynchronous. And our plan, because it's best practice with virtual learning, is to have a combination of both synchronous and asynchronous learning for students. We will be, as we develop those plans based on the number of students that are in-house and how many are virtual, and how we develop the staff for those two parts, we'll get more information out to families about what that specifically will look like. If virtual learning, and would you be able to record Google Meet lesson sessions so parents could help them after work if needed? We'll look into if that's something that we're able to do and have those posted. And also, if a tutor or individual help is needed during a virtual lesson, will this be accessible? If students typically, through their IEP, have para help or need just intervention help in their core classes or in their other classes, we have a team that's working on how we're going to be able to provide that, that both academic help for students and social emotional support for students. So I don't have specifics on what that will look like, but I think that that's something that's an important point and something that we'll continue to work on and get information out to families. Will wearing face coverings being worn properly enforced, not wearing it over the nose, for example? Absolutely. We will. Part of wearing a face covering is wearing it properly. It doesn't do any good to wear it, but not wear it properly. So it will be enforced that, and we'll have visual representation up. We'll be making videos for all of our students, especially for our younger students, about what proper face covering means, and we will enforce that, yes. Since students will only have in-class instruction every other day, how will students not fall behind with the curriculum since there will, let me read that again. How will students not fall behind with the curriculum since there will only be half the in-class instruction time? The instruction time will involve, when students are on site, the instruction time will involve both the new material for that day and preview instruction on what students will be doing on their day where they are virtual. So I'm not sure beyond that, how will students not fall behind? The idea was that they will be doing both their one lesson on the day that they're in on-site and one lesson on the day that they are off-site. Why not do 100% temperature checks before entering the building like businesses are doing for their employees or Mercy does before entering a clinic? Not everyone believes this virus is real, so not everyone will self-assess. We have a requirement that people will self-assess. If we do have reason to believe that someone isn't, we would work with that family to reinforce the importance of self-assessing. The screening process is more than just the temperature check, though. So the self-assessment is both taking the temperature, asking and giving answers to the questions about symptoms and about who they have or have not been in contact with. If we're bringing hundreds of students in at the start of a school day to our school building, we don't have the physical ability to take a temperature, ask screening questions, ask who they've been in contact with questions, and then if someone doesn't pass that screening, find a place to house them and wait for parents to get there and pick them up. And in the meantime, that person that doesn't pass the screening has ridden on a bus with other students, which we would prefer that they not do, and come in contact with other students and staff members during the course of the screening process, which we would prefer that they not do. And if a student is not being honest with us about whether they've screened, including those questions, they could be just as dishonest with us as they're walking in the door, and we do that screening on site. I think that our desire is to have faith in our families that they understand that this is done to protect our students and staff. And in order to stay with a on-site option, we have to be able to have people stay home when they are feeling ill and not passing that temperature check. We definitely have the ability that if someone is showing symptoms and on site to deal with them at that time. Has the district looked into any type of air purifying system for the classrooms? That is something that we've taken a look at. There's some advantages and disadvantages to that type of thing. If there's too much air movement, there's been some studies that have shown that increases the range of the spread of the virus. But if there are things out there that have been proven to clean or purify the virus in the air, we definitely would be open to looking at those things. I think the question about communication with the teacher is more about developing a connection relationship with the teacher versus when can a teacher student ask a question. Can you address that? Yeah, and I think that's a really good question because those personal connections are really important. And it's something that it's a downside definitely for students that choose the virtual only option is that they aren't as able to make that personal connection. So what we'll do, we're alert to that. I don't know if we specifically have a plan in place on what that would look like, but we're alert to it and want to make sure that we're taking opportunities to develop those connections, those personal connections. Question, if masks are required, why would they be allowed off in a small room setting for a long period of time, even if they are indeed more than 6 feet apart? That's a lot of time in a small area with little circulation. I guess in answer to that, I wouldn't see it being for a long period of time because it would only be when there's the physical distancing in the class and nobody's moving around the classroom. In most cases, the teacher is going to be actively moving around the classroom. Students are going to be up and moving around the classroom. So it really is a case where if everyone is in their desk and they are working individually, and it typically would not be a very long period of time, we would allow people to take a break from their face covering and take it off. We recommend that they keep it on or that they take it off and put it right back on after taking a short break from it. But we do allow them in our plan to take it off during that time. Question, can we have half the students come in for the first half of the day and the second half of the group come in the second half? So all students could be in class each day for some part of the day and remaining half day be virtual homework time. That isn't the plan that the board approved at the last board meeting. I can read into the question an advantage that the writer of the question would feel that there would be in that, but I think that there's also some disadvantages to that. One of the things that Rock County Public Health recommends is keeping our cohort groups as small as possible and having fewer number of students in the building each day allows us to do that cleaning at the end of the day, allows if someone does come down with symptoms the next day. If a teacher comes down with symptoms the next day, they've interacted with a smaller group of students. So there are some strong safety reasons to not go down that path. If a student is unable to attend a synchronous lesson, unreliable internet, illness, whatever reason, how will it affect their grade? Will the lesson be available at other times if the student doesn't attend the synchronous? We would hope that they'd be able to attend the synchronous lesson. Some of those are things that are not in their control where we typically would have an excused absence for a student. If they're ill, if they have a medical appointment, we will work with families if they don't have internet access or if it's not reliable. We are looking at, we have some mobile hotspots available and we had those out last spring to families, but we are doubling, more than doubling our size of those. And so I want to encourage families, if you don't have internet access at home or if it's spotty, to respond when we reach out in August to get on our list for people that could use a mobile hotspot. We hope that there's not a caring for siblings issue because, and I understand every family's situation is different, but there is an expectation that at times that student is going to be available for synchronous learning. And then in general, to answer the question, if a student is unable to attend, we would treat it like they weren't able to make it to any other lesson. There was a question earlier about whether we could record those and have those available, and we'll look at that as an option. But not knowing an answer to that yet, they would just need to work out with their teacher on how they would make up the information that they missed. How will band be handled if a student is doing virtual learning? That's something that we'll have to get, I'm not certain on that. We're not even certain yet how band will be handled on site. So that's something that we'll have to get more information out to folks about as soon as we're able. Agree with a question, allowing masks off in classrooms is indoors, small areas, and increases risks. There isn't any doubt that making that a recommendation at those times and not a requirement does change the level of risk. We feel in working with Rock County Public Health that as long as people are outside that 6-foot range and the time is short, that the facial coverings are off, that's a road that we prefer to go down. We do know that people disagree with that. We also know that there are people who feel that we shouldn't require masks at all or face coverings at all. Excuse me again. But I think that our plan finds that balance between limiting the risk in a reasonable way, but also giving people the option to remove those for small periods of time. Question, the student attends in person at the high school. Will all their classes be offered during their cohort day? Specifically thinking of classes that are not as popular, music theory, drumline, etc. The plan is that courses that that have a large enough group that we would be offering them this year will be offered, and that students would just follow their regular classes for that day, is our plan. More specific questions on that should follow up with the high school admin team. How will science classes be handled, including media classes and cooking class? That's a question that will depend on the number of folks who are on site or virtual. And maybe more specific of a question than I'm able to answer. Lab type situations, we would have to look at how someone that chooses to be virtual can handle classes that have lab type situations. So that's something that we will get out to folks as we have more information. I think you mentioned that Rock County will release more guidance on safety later this week or early next week. Can we delay our choice until we understand Rock County's stance on quarantine? I've shared publicly a few times what Rock County's stance on quarantine is. They just haven't released it publicly yet. They've talked to us about it. It is and we've lived this already with them over the summer. They look at the past 48 hours before someone has symptoms. And during that past 48 hours, they look at who they've had physical contact with or who they've been within 6 feet of indoors for 15 or more minutes. And those are the quarantine people. So we're asking that people make their decision based on that information, with the idea that if changed or additional information comes out down the road, you'll be able to change the choice that you make. How often will classrooms be sanitized, and what does that sanitation include? I'll talk a little bit just in general, not just about classrooms, but sanitation across the school. And I'm going to start with hand washing a little bit and kind of personal hygiene. We don't have a requirement on the number of times that people wash their hands throughout the day, but it's one of the most important guidelines that people are regularly washing their hands. We can't help but come in contact with desks, tables, things that other people, doorknobs, things that other people touch during the day. You can go through your day being alert to those things and touching as few things as possible. But the other thing that you can do is make sure that you're both washing your hands and using hand sanitizer as often as possible. So I think that is one piece of the puzzle, is making sure hand washing is done as often as possible and hand sanitizer is available in every classroom, and we will have that in every classroom. And then as far as disinfecting and cleaning, sanitizing the classrooms, that's something that we will be doing as students leave. At the middle school and high school, we know that students leave their classroom and go to another classroom, and a new group of students will be coming in. So there will be an expectation that each desk and chairs will be wiped down during that passing time between every class. And then every evening, classrooms will be cleaned and sanitized every evening. And common places, stairways, things like that will be sanitized every evening. Questions, so if the children are going to be going to school 3 days one week and then 2 the next, how are they supposed to keep things straight and keep up with their schoolwork? How will this affect the busing system? The bus routes will run for that area of town and pick up the students who are going to school that day. So the bus driver, the bus company will be alert to who's in cohort A and cohort B, and we'll have stops for those days. And for the students, it will just be following an every other day schedule. So on every day that they come to school, it will look the same. Their bus will pick them up at the same place. We'll drop them off at the same place, pick them up at the same time. They'll go to the same classes every day on the days that they're in school. They just will come to school every other day. So if you're home, if you're in that group, if that's what you chose, if you're home on a Wednesday, then on the next day, you're going to be coming to school that day. How will we enforce the requirement that parents screen their kids every day? We will work with families to make sure that they're screened. There'll be a sign-off system that the student or the parent will sign off, log in and sign off that they screened themselves. We'll monitor that for students. If students are not signing off that they've screened themselves, then we will, again, similar to what I talked about before, we would give them a reminder. And then if it becomes a case where they are ignoring that reminder, then we would work with them on moving to the virtual option for that if they choose not to follow the requirements that we have. High school band, how that be handled if a student is viral. I think we just talked about that, that there's still some uncertainty there, but we'll get that out to families as soon as we can. Will there still be construction going on during the year? Does that add extra people to the community? Are we working with construction crews? The first question, yeah, the construction will be going on throughout the year. It's been going on since this spring. It won't be completely finalized at the middle school or the high school until about this time a year from now. We have been working closely with the construction crews about physical distancing and safety. When students come back, they're doing a lot of their interior work right now in the school. There will not be much interior work going on while students are in the school. A lot of their work right now is getting some of that work done. And then when the school year starts, a lot of their work will be on the new STEM wing, where we won't be sending students, the new pool, the new gym area. I'm speaking at the high school, where we won't have students going because it will be construction area, and that will all be blocked off. Students won't have access to that area. There may occasionally be times during the school day where construction staff needs to get into the middle school area where students are, but they would maintain the same guidelines that we have for any visitors. They would be maintaining social distancing. They would be wearing face coverings while they're inside the building. Jeremy Billhorn said the end of the first trimester is November 24th, the Tuesday before Thanksgiving. The end of the first quarter at the middle school is October 30th. And so that's the first grading period at the first quarter. Thank you, Tara and Jeremy. Question, does that mean that middle school students could request a change in placement at the end of the first quarter? Yes, they could. Any middle school students at the end of the first quarter, high school students at the end of the first trimester. And if there's some extreme circumstance that's going on during the quarter or the semester, I think working with our building administrators on that issue. A comment more than a question, you can't send special ed students every day. That defeats the purpose of cohorts. It will depend on we have to follow state and federal laws. We don't have an option to not follow state and federal laws. And the federal laws say that the IEP team determines what that looks like. I hope that I didn't imply that if a student is a special ed student, that means that they would be coming every day. And that's hopefully not what I said, and definitely not what I meant. It would be up to that team to determine what that student's disability requires. And if the student's disability requires something, then the IEP requires some type of accommodations, then the IEP team determines what those accommodations would be. We have another question from Brian Quapo. If they are to do a lesson on their virtual day, how will you ensure students are not responsible for teaching themselves that lesson per your previous description? I feel like I've answered that question multiple times. The teacher that's teaching that virtual lesson will provide the instruction for that lesson, and they are still teaching. And virtual teaching happens across the globe successfully on a regular basis, and it happens really well. We jumped into it this spring without much time for training staff and without the opportunity to make many changes to it. But over the summer, we've done a lot of work with professional development with our staff. We'll continue to do professional development with our staff. We have some great sessions coming up over the course of the next few days in helping staff to learn how to implement best practice in providing virtual instruction in their class, with their classroom, with students who are in a hybrid system and with students who have chosen to do virtual. We'd be really happy to sit down with anyone who needs more information on that topic and help them come to a better understanding of what that could look like. Is there a decision about transfer buses, or will buses go straight to the school, middle school specific? I think that is something that is going to need to be a question for the middle school admin team. It might be something that we're still working on because we are still ironing out transportation details depending on how many students are coming to school every day. One other benefit of the hybrid system is it does spread out the students on the bus too, so we are less likely to have to add bus routes at the 7th through 12th grade level. But the specific question about transfer buses, I don't know the answer to that right now. I'll take a couple more questions here. I'm not sure how many more we have. We're at about an hour and 45 or an hour and 15 minutes. Is that right? We're at about an hour and 15 minutes. So I'll take a few more questions here. A question that was written down here that came from another chat that is a quick one. Can students use backpacks if they can't use lockers? Typically, we don't allow students to bring backpacks into class, but the safety concern with having all the students at their lockers at a time is a very valid concern. So we will allow students to bring their backpacks to class. Because the classes will only be half full, there'll be more space in the classroom for backpacks, and the teachers will work with the students on where they want those backpacks stored in their classrooms. And one other one that was written down, will juniors be able to take the ACT? What about testing? Any type of national and statewide testing is still a little bit up in the air. If the test is offered, we will definitely put a plan in place on how to give students the opportunity to take those tests, whether they're statewide tests or national tests like the ACT. I'll jump back into the chat box for a little bit. Can you explain why surrounding schools are able to offer the choice of virtual schooling, hybrid, or returning to school full-time and still maintain social distancing? However, Milton cannot. And if the only reason is due to staffing, how do you justify moving teachers to accommodate the younger students, therefore leaving our older students without? I want to make sure I understand that question completely. So if there's pieces of this that I don't answer completely, I would encourage you to get in touch with me and we can kind of talk this through. There's really two pieces to, are we able to provide distance learning for students at a school? And those two pieces are the physical space of the school. Do we have room to add additional classes so that we don't have classes that are grouped together in sizes smaller than 6 feet? And do we have the staff available in order to do that? Right away, as we started our planning, we looked at whether at all of our schools that would be an option. At our 4K through 3rd grade schools, at Northside, at the middle school, and at the high school, are we able to do we have enough space to spread students out? And do we have enough staff to be able to spread students out? And it became obvious very soon that at the high school and the middle school, we don't have enough space to be able to spread students out in groups that maintain that 6-foot social distancing. So to bring those students in, to bring all students into the high school or the middle school, we would throw out that physical distancing and put our students and staff at risk, and it's not a risk that we're willing to take. A couple of the reasons why we have that space at the elementary schools and not the middle school, the referendum projects have really helped us out at the elementary schools. Those will be finished before the start of the school year, so that has provided us some much needed additional space at East, West, and Harmony and Consolidated. And the projects aren't finished at the middle school and the high school. And as you know, we have pretty significant additions coming on to our middle school and high school because we're smaller to begin with at our middle school and high school. Those schools are pretty cramped to begin with. So it's in part a staff issue, but even with additional staff, we don't have the space availability at the high school or the middle school to bring all of the students in. And we prioritized making sure that our younger students are able to come to school every day because we know that families have a need. It helps with that family daycare need, And we know that older students are able to get more out of virtual learning options than our younger students. So bringing all of our students into the middle school and high school would come at a risk of, or a sacrifice of, not being able to bring our students in every day at our younger grades, and we didn't want to put that risk in place. I'll do 2 more questions, and then we'll close for now and come back later to any others, or get answers out to others. Who will have to wipe down the desks and chairs between passing time? If you expect teachers to do that, how will they be enforcing social distancing in the hallways? What we would expect is, at the end of the class period, that students would help with that. We will have enough of the disinfectant to have students help with their desk and chairs. What we have in place right now for staff is that when you leave a work area, you're in charge of disinfecting that work area, and that's a good way to think of it. So if a student is at a desk in a math class, their class period is done. One of the materials that we have, if there's another class coming in, they would spray it down and wipe it off. And then we would discard those rags. And we have a system set up to be able to do that fairly efficiently at the end of a class period. If there isn't a group coming in the next class and the desks can sit for a while, one of the sprays that we use can sit on the desk without needing to be wiped down if it's sprayed well. And then it disinfects coronavirus and other viruses as it's sitting there. If there are students who have a reason that they choose not to take part in that, the chemical that we use has been rated as a risk of 0 by the groups that do that. So it doesn't have harmful chemicals in it. But if there are students who don't feel comfortable with helping with that, we would work with them on an exception to that. And the last question for now looks like it's maybe the exact same question. Who will be wiping down the classroom after each class? Teacher or students before they leave? So I think that I just answered that. Since that was the same one, we'll do one more. How will prep for the ACT be affected by this hybrid plan? The hybrid and virtual options wouldn't affect preparation for the ACT. We would continue to help students be prepared for the ACT test. The expectations for students when they're not on site would be the same standards that students have when they're on site. We decreased our expectations this spring because we were jumping into virtual learning without the time for staff to be prepared. But we expect our students to achieve extremely well, whether they choose a complete virtual option or a hybrid option. And we continue to monitor because, as we've said many times before, the situation is very likely to change. What's likely to happen is we'll get back in school, and not just us, and schools across the state and across the country. And either there will be outbreaks and we will likely move back to virtual only learning, which will be happening across the country. Our students won't be at any more of a disadvantage than any other students. Or things will go well, there won't be outbreaks, and we'll be able to loosen our restrictions and bring students back as Rock County Public Health goes to phase 3. And again, in that case, we would not, we would continue to prepare our students for everything that they have coming up at the next grade level or for your high school. So we feel that we can do that really well, and that we've come up with a plan that balances that need to make sure that our students and staff and families are safe, and that provides a high quality education for all of our students. So if you have questions that we didn't get to, or if the information that we shared leads to new questions for you, I strongly encourage you to reach out to your building principals. If it's a question specific to transportation or quarantines, hold off for a little bit, because we're working with Go Right Way. We're working with Rock County Public Health on what those specific guidelines are going to look like. But definitely feel free to reach out with specific questions that you have. We appreciate your time. We really appreciate our partnership. One of the things that I've seen really clearly during my first year here in Milton is that we have a really high quality school district. And it's in large part because we have an incredible staff throughout our district, and we have great partnerships with our families. We want to look for ways that we maintain those things and even enhance those things as we move forward together. So thank you all for your time. You are very, very much appreciated, and we will stay in touch. Thanks a lot.